We're going to be looking at Revelation 12. Now, last time we were together, we were looking at Revelation 12. We did a little bit in there, and I was kind of unpacking some of the imagery here, because this section that we're into, Revelation 12, 13, 14, there's a lot of imagery to it. Where up until now, the only real imagery is if you try to make it imagery. And what I mean by that is it says that, excuse me, the angel blew his trumpet and a third of the trees burned. That only becomes imagery if you try to make it imagery. There's no reason to deny that's exactly what happens. But here, all of a sudden, we get a woman, a dragon, a child. We're going to come into it. We're going to get one beast from the sea, another beast from the land. Then we're eventually going to get a woman dressed in purple clothes riding a beast. So you got a lot of imagery here. And so we're going to be unpacking that. And we started that last time as we looked at verses 1 through 6, where we understood just from the imagery that the son or the male child is clearly Christ. Rule with an iron scepter. It's a direct reference to Psalm 2 that is used there. And so there's no denying that it is Jesus that is mentioned here. And it's speaking in essence of his earthly ministry, his start of it and his end of it. The dragon, there's no reason to deny this. The dragon with 7 heads, 10 horns, 7 diadems on his heads, that represents Satan, Lucifer. There's no debating that. Like I said, no matter what school you come from on this, those things are settled. Everybody agrees on them. Where the disagreement came, and we looked at last week, was who's the woman. Even tonight, as I was getting ready and running over some things again, I'd run into this idea that the woman represents the church. But I run into a problem with that because that kind of puts things out of order. And what I mean by that is if the child is clearly Jesus, that means the church gave birth to Jesus, who then built the church. So you run into a circular thing that doesn't make any sense unless you want a time-traveling paradox. And you end up as your own grandfather or something. And so we looked at it and was like, no, it's not that one. That one really doesn't fit. Then it's like, okay, so we're left with 2. Is it Mary or is it Israel kind of thing? And we're like, well, why Mary? Well, it says she gave birth to the Messiah. So that's a good thing for Mary. Well, except there's also a problem here as we continue on, is you got the woman is before the child is born, the woman is after the child is born, and then the woman also is much later after the child because she's going to be persecuted and need to flee. So although Mary somewhat fits, she doesn't quite fit. That left us with the idea of Israel. But, as is common the way I teach, Israel doesn't always mean Israel here. And the reason I say that is because if I said, I want you to think of Israel, the first thing you're probably going to think of is national Israel. That was reestablished in 1948. Although national Israel has a part to play, I don't think this fits here. Because not all Israel is Israel. Even Jesus said that. They claim to be Israel, but they're of the synagogue of Satan. Jesus even says, you want to claim Abraham as your father, but Abraham's not your father. Because if Abraham was your father, you would believe him and then believe in me. So here, Israel more represents what I'll classify as remnant Israel. The true, faithful followers of the living God. They're the ones who look through. If you look at the line, go from like the line of Judah to, then you look at the line of David and you work your way down. So in that aspect, there's always a core remnant that have been God's. And that is his true Israel. And so the woman, better off, represents the true remnant, faithful Israel, God's chosen people that have been used to accomplish his purposes, of which Mary is one of them. And they will continue on. And so that's going to become important because the church, or in other words, believers, are going to come into play a little bit later. So if you're wondering where I'm coming from, that's where I'm coming from. The woman represents the faithful believers of, in this case, of Israel, the remnant faithful believers. And there's no reason to deny that also because, as we studied back in Revelation 7, it separates two groups. It's got the 12,000 of each of the 12 tribes, even 144,000, and it also had the innumerable amount that were also sealed from every tribe, tongue, and nation. Now, with that, so it kind of introduces here. Now, there's kind of a bookend thing here happening, and I haven't read the text yet because I'm going to be jumping here to understand where we are. Just notice verse 6 again. So it sets up this thing where the woman gives birth to the child. The dragon tries to consume the child right at birth. That shouldn't be a surprise. We can look at that in history. As soon as Jesus was born, when I say soon, but within that time frame, what happened? Yeah, King Herod's like, let's get rid of them. And then it jumps to the end. He tries to devour, but that doesn't happen. The child or her child was caught up to God and his throne. That would be the ascension. So it doesn't cover the full ministry, it just does the bookends kind of thing. But then you got the woman fled into the wilderness where she had a place prepared by God that they should feed her there 1,260 days. Now the reason that's important is because right after this, near the end, she is going to run away again. And the reason that that's important here, I'm just trying to skip to the part where it says she's taken care of again. When I read it again, I'll know. Okay, there it is. Verse 14. But the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle that she might fly into the wilderness to her place where she is nourished for a time and times and half a time from the presence of the serpent. So if you look, those 2 verses, verse 6 and verse 14, they're bookends. They're the same thing. Now, why is that important? Because that means verse 7 through 12 are an interlude. But what I mean by interlude, it's kind of like you ever watch a movie where it suddenly goes, meanwhile, that's what's going on here. It's going, this is what's happening. It's like, okay, so it just says that the dragon tries to consume the child. The child ascends to heaven, and then the woman runs to the wilderness. Now she flees to the wilderness. And then we're left with the question, why did she flee? That's what's being answered. So with that in mind, let's take a look. We'll go from verse 7 to verse 12 for the moment before we move on. It says, and war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought. But they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer. So the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Then I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, now salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ have come. For the accuser of the brethren, who accused them before our God day and night, has been cast down. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. And they did not love their lives to the death. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea, for the devil has come down to you, having great wrath, because he knows that he has a short time. I almost want to read that the other way. His time is short. But sometimes when I want to quote the text rather than read it. So we get here a picture of something that happens in the heavenly realms. I mean, we're going to have to ask some questions that you probably never really thought of. But we're going to unpack them anyway. So it's this idea that something's taking place in the heavenly realms. Satan and his angels are fighting against Michael and his angels. And Satan loses the battle and he's cast out of heaven. And he's cast down to the earth. One question is, when does this take place? Has it already taken place? Would we know if it's taken place? See, these are things you probably didn't think of. You're just going, okay, let's just go through it. But when it took place is actually an interesting question, and it's the one that I've been studying on for a little while now. Because there's two main thoughts. There's the first one that you're probably already having, which is actually my number 2, is that this is a future, not yet event that will take place sometime future. For many, they say, well, this is an event that takes place at the midpoint of the tribulation. And we'll look at that argument. The other one is, this is something that's already taken place. When did this take place? Well, this was the ministry of Jesus. And we'll unpack some of that as well, of how did they arrive at this point of view. And then you're going to go, which one is correct? In truth, I don't know. It's one of those ones that I can't tell you. One of the things that I often do, if you notice the way I work directly what is from the text itself. This is something that it doesn't actually tell us when it happens. And in fact, Revelation 12 here has actually given a broader scope. The woman has given birth to a child. That's something that already took place. The ascension of Jesus, that's something that already took place. So we've got a scope that's kind of in there. But let's look at the other evidence. So how do you arrive at the conclusion that perhaps this has already happened? Maybe this is something that took place during the ministry of Jesus. And there is biblical backing for this. We're going to be going into some of the Gospels here. Let's go to John chapter 16 first. John chapter 16. And this is actually talking about the Holy Spirit, and the ministry of the Holy Spirit is going to come. But I'm going to start at verse 5, just so you don't lose the context here. But verse 11 is where I really want to end up. But now I go away to him who sent me, and none of you asks me, where are you going? But because I have said these things to you, sorrow has filled your hearts. Nevertheless, I tell you the truth. It is to your advantage that I go away. For if I do not go away, the Helper will not come to you. But if I depart, I will send him to you. And when he comes, he will convict the world of sin and of righteousness and of judgment. Of sin, because they do not believe in me. Of righteousness, because I go to my Father and you see me no more. In verse 11, of judgment, because the ruler of this world is judged. Now, who do the scriptures give the indication of who the ruler of the world is? That would be the enemy, Satan. And so in this aspect, they're like, well, see, this is where the battle's really being fought. It's the fact through the ministry of Jesus. He's already executed judgment on the ruler of this world. Let me give you another one. Let's go to Luke chapter 11. Luke chapter 11. This is something that Jesus taught. One page. Luke chapter 11. And it's in where Jesus is teaching about a house divided cannot stand. We're going to be going to verse 21 is where we're going to go. I'm just going to start at verse 16 again because I like the context. Others testing him sought from him a sign from heaven. But he, knowing their hearts, said to them, every kingdom divided against itself is brought to desolation, and a house divided against a house falls. If Satan is also divided against himself, how will his kingdom stand? Because you say, I cast out demons by Beelzebub. And if I cast out demons by Beelzebub, by whom do your sons cast them out? Therefore they will be your judges. But if I cast out demons and with the finger of God, surely the kingdom of God has come upon you. When a strong man, fully armed, guards his own palace, his goods are in peace. But when a stronger than he comes upon him and overcomes him, he takes from him all his armor in which he trusted and divides his spoils. He who is not with me is against me, and he who does not gather with me scatters. So the imagery here is the fact that Satan is the strong man and Jesus has plundered him already. He's come in, taken everything, and now he's lost his authority. And one of the other ones, I don't have the reference right in front of me here, is Jesus makes the claim that he says, I saw Satan fall from heaven like lightning. When did that happen? We're going to go, is that the original fall or something else? You see, so when you look at it, it's possible that understanding this revelation is something that already took place in the scope of things, particularly since it's already mentioned in Revelation 12, like I said, the birth of Jesus and his ascension. And so there is argument to say that, hey, this spot about the dragon losing his spot in heaven and his accusations, well, he's already lost it. He's already been cast down. And so there's a bit of an argument for it. What about the other one, saying it's something left to come? Well, when I look at directly into the text, first of all, the text doesn't tell us when. It simply goes, the woman is fleeing, she's taken care of for 1,260 days. Then later on, she's taken care of for time, times, and half a time. They're said two different ways, but they're the exact same amount of time, just so you know. It's 3.5 years. Time, times, and half a time. And this is the reason, but it seems to indicate that the woman is fleeing at this time because it's the seventh trumpet, which means the kingdom has come, and this is taking place. This at the same time. I'm trying to gather my thoughts here to present this right. So it's sticking it in the spot when this is happening. In other words, where it is in the text, it didn't put it in the middle of this time, these 1,260 days. It seems to indicate it at the start of it. And so even if you're trying to place this in the tribulation event, if you start at the end and count back that time frame for when she would flee, that puts it right about the mid, which actually works. It's a good spot to put it, particularly when you run into the fact that Jesus mentions, like when you see the abomination of desolation that can come. It fills the prophecies of earlier in Daniel. So this really gives a good understanding. So in other words, there's evidence for both in actuality. Or you can actually say they're the same event somehow, if you want to throw time completely out of the equation, which will really make your head spins. Based on what I'm looking at, and this is completely my own, just because of the fact that the text doesn't say one way or the other. From reading the text, to me, it looks more that it's going to fit, that it's something that's future to happen, as a big event that's going to happen. Now, in other words, there's going to come a time when that Michael's going to fight, and Satan will lose his privilege to enter in to the throne room of God, to make his accusations. And the reason I tend to go more that way, as I said, it comes from the text, and I think it fits better with it. Because one of the things it seems to really indicate, for the devil has come down to you and having great wrath because he knows that he has a short time, or his time is short. And he's going to persecute the woman. And she's kept for a very specific time. Now, up till now, I don't think there's any reason to try to say that these times just mean a specific short amount of time, if you know what I mean. Because people try to make it figurative. It's saying it multiple times. Time, times, and half a time. 1,260 days. That seems too specific to be saying, oh, it's just a symbolic number. And the other thing is, if it's a case of something that's already happened and just being played out, what's the dragon been doing all this time? And the reason I'm not asking that just rhetorically, it's an interesting question to consider. If he's been cast out and he's cast down to the earth and his time is short and he has great wrath, well, it doesn't really seem to line up with it, if you know what I mean. It says the time is short, but he's not seeming to do anything. And what I mean by that, when you compare that to what we're about to read about the woman persecuted and her offspring persecuted, it seems like a very intense, super persecution. I'm not saying the church hasn't been persecuted and believers haven't been persecuted throughout the ages, but they're more selective, if you know what I mean. So like at one time, the church in China was very, very, very persecuted. Another time, church in Korea was very, very persecuted. And yet, this seems to indicate one where he's incredibly angry that he goes after all of them, which would also seem to line up a lot better with what you'd classify as the mark of the beast. And why would I say that? Well, think about it. According to the text, what has Satan been doing? Well, it made it clear that he's been accusing the brethren. For the accuser of the brethren who accused them before our God day and night has been cast down. So what is he doing? He's constantly making the argument about who's not saved, who's under condemnation, why they deserve wrath. That's really what he's been doing the entire time. And yet when he's cast out, he loses the ability to do this. And if he's lost the ability to do this, well, he could still do it in a way. How can he do it? Well, instead of trying to make the argument there, make everybody take a mark who's against God. Say, see, these are the accusers, and then trying to force the believers to take that same mark. That would be the accusation. Now, again, I'm open about this. That's my own kind of understanding and interpretation of how it goes. So, as I said, for me, I think it's more of a future event. It's a final future. He's cast down, and now he knows his time is really short, and so he's just going to unleash everything. The other question, and this is one that comes up, and this is one I shouldn't need to in this context, but the question that comes up is, who's Michael? And the reason I bring that up is because in some of the commentaries, some discussions, one even full out put out that it is clear from the text that Michael is clearly the child who was born. And how do they get that? Like, well, he was born, then when he ascended back to heaven, and he drove the dragon out. That's kind of how they do it. And the name Michael, if I get this right, means who is like our God. So like, see? And just so you know, it's Jehovah's Witnesses who hold such a doctrine, that Jesus is actually the Archangel Michael. And that when he was crucified, this is their doctrine, this is not what I'm teaching, this is their doctrine, that he was given his old body back. His human body was disintegrated, and the new body was given back, and he reclaimed his position as Michael the Archangel. Well, we've got some problems here, and I'm going to give you the main one why this isn't going to work. Number one, easily, let's just go for a second to Jude. A little small book of Jude. And I'll back up verse 8 and verse 9, but it's verse 9 that I want. Likewise, also these dreamers defile the flesh, reject authority, and speak evil of dignitaries. Yet Michael the archangel, in contending with the devil when he disputed about the body of Moses, dare not bring against him a reviling accusation, but said, "The Lord rebuke you." Yet Jesus made it clear, even in his ministry, that he rebuked Satan plenty of times because he had the authority to. And so what you see here is that this doesn't match up. So first of all, they try to play on names, but here you see that Michael is battling and says he doesn't really have the authority, so he just goes, "The Lord rebuke you." He calls him one who's higher. So you kind of run into it. The other argument they make is like, well, see, Michael is commanding angels, and Jesus is the one who commands angels. Yet, take a look at the second phrase of that, when it talks about that Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and then look what it says, and the dragon and his angels. Remember, in this case, angels literally means messengers. That's what it means. So in other words, his servants fighting against Michael and his men. The only thing that this tells us is that there's a clear hierarchy even in the angelic realm. That's all it really tells us, is that Michael is a commander of angels. Now, it's not the first time we ran into Michael, just so you know, if you're with us for Daniel chapter 12, Michael comes and helps. He says, another spot, he says, you were praying. He's like, I got stuck until Michael, the one who watches over your people, he came and helped me. And then he says, after he delivers, I've got to go back and join the fight. So there's a spiritual battle always going around here. And so the only reason I bring that up is because there are some, and you'll run into commenters that will try to claim that Michael is the child who was born, or that Michael is Jesus in this context, and that's going to lead you down a bad path, honestly. But Michael is just it seems to be one of the chief angels of God, and that's why we call him an archangel kind of thing. And more likely, he's the one, this is where you get cherubim and seraphim. Seraphim are more the declarers of God's glory, if you want. Gabriel, the trumpets, proclamation, God's messages. Michael is a cherubim, which are the defenders of God's holiness. They're the ones who, well, as it says, defenders. So he's battling against the dragon. This makes sense, kind of thing. And so he's battling and he's fighting and he makes his fighting, but up until this point, Satan has just been casting accusation, as it says, and he loses his ability to do this. It says, for there is found for them in heaven no place for them any longer in heaven. And so they were cast out. And where do they get cast out to? The earth. That's where they're coming. Which means the period that is to come, we often look at it and think, oh, it's a period of divine judgment. But it is also, by this notion, is going to be a time of intense demonic movement as well, because their fury is there. And a lot of people, they don't want to look at the fact that there is a demonic realm outside of looking at a scary movie. But people love to think about angels. So, oh, they're watching over me, and you get the worst. It's like, oh, they've now become an angel. But there is a realm that is also the demonic realm. And people want to dismiss this. They say, well, there's no such thing as demon possession anymore because we now understand psychology. And I would say that's spoken by people who have never actually encountered the demonic realm. Because there is a difference. And yet, it's going to become even more intense during this time frame. And it's interesting that even the proclamation is said. I'm going to jump here before I go back to the whole thing, but just look at the second half of verse 12. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea, for the devil has come down to you having great wrath, because he knows his time is short. So the heaven rejoices, but to the people of the earth it is woe. Remember here, Revelation, when it's using woe, it means that it's something that is going to directly affect the people of the earth. When you had the trumpets, after the fourth trumpet, it then said, woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth for the sounding of the last three trumpets, or the sounding of the three trumpets the angels were about to blow. And then the next plague was the demonic locust, which hit men for 5 months. Then the next one is the demonic horsemen in combination with the witnesses. And this is going on. Those are woe. So when you got a woe here, Satan's going to take out his wrath on everyone. That's what he's going to do. Particularly, he's going to go after the children of the woman. And we'll unpack that. But there is a reason to rejoice. There is. This is where, up until now, it sounds like woe, because this is going to be a problem here that is going to be terrible. But he says, now I heard a loud voice, verse 10, saying in heaven, now salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brethren, who accused them before our God day and night, has been cast down. Now, here's the thing. How do they overcome? And this is going to be the same thing that answers, how can I be sure that I'm one of the sealed from Revelation chapter 11, who received the seal of Christ? And it's going to bring this up again later. There was a reminder. How? They overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, and they did not love their lives to the death. So there's threefold. The blood of the Lamb, their testimony, and their perseverance. Now, why are those three things important? Well, first, without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness of sins. In other words, the accusations of the dragon are true. They're real accusations. He doesn't have to lie about our sinfulness. He just lay it out. And yet, how is it therefore that we can be forgiven? How can we overcome this accusation? Well, it's not by our doing. It's through the sacrifice of Christ. His shed blood has given us the forgiveness of sins, and so now the accusation doesn't hold. And so now, what is our plea? It is not a plea of guilt anymore. It's, I plead Christ and him crucified. And remember, the words of being spoken, when it talks about the words of testimony, this is something that we've separated, but I covered this actually 4 weeks ago in Sunday morning. When we were talking about what is a Christian, we talked about speech. And it's this: from the wellspring of the heart, the mouth speaks. In other words, the proclamation is from within them. And from within inside. Again, Romans 10:9-10. If we believe in our heart that Jesus is Lord, if we confess with our mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in our heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. For it is with your heart that you believed and are justified, but with your mouth you confess and are saved. There's a proclamation aspect to this. Because it continues on. Nobody who is of the Spirit can say, Jesus be cursed, because it's not in them. And so the act of speaking and proclaiming shows what is inside the person. And you got to remember, in a context that will say, hey, to proclaim Jesus Christ is Lord is going to give you a death sentence, people aren't going to go, hey, I'm going to say this for the fun of it. They're going to say it because they believe it and they know it. And so that's where the proclamation is. And when you start to think of some of the early church martyrs like Polycarp and some of the others, even after torturing all day, and they said, you're going to be executed, you're going to be burned. It's like, he has done so much for me. How could I dare deny him? And they went to death. They would not do it. And then the idea of perseverance there is really, like, if we truly have faith, it is going to be shown in our life. And it really comes down to, what did Jesus say? Unless you, then he went on to spiel, he says, unless you hate your mother and your parents and your siblings, you cannot truly follow me. He says, truly, unless you even hate your own life, you cannot be worthy, you're not worthy of my disciples. In other words, Christ is first for them. That's the point. And I think that hits us so hard because we've lived in a spot where we've had things so easy, where everything comes so easy, where I could walk out in the street and say, hey, I'm a Christian, and somebody may say something, somebody else may tell me just, hey, whatever, keep that to yourself, no one cares. And others will just be like, whatever, and just walk on. Versus in a society where they're really hostile, and you go and you say, hey, I'm a follower of Christ, and that's going to the end of us, well, we're going to run into a problem. Because that is what the perseverance means. It means my faith is on display, that I will choose Christ even over myself. And when you think that the apostles, and you got to remember when John wrote this from the proclamation, he's got to be thinking of his friends and his fellow disciples who he knows of that are all executed for the faith. In fact, he's on the island of Patmos for that very faith. He's the last one of the originals. And so that hits us hard, but it's like count the cost. Particularly when it's going to be during a time where, as I said, you refuse the mark, you're executed. And so he says they would rather die for the sake of Christ than anything else. And he says no matter what the dragon is going to bring, no matter what wickedness he's going to bring, what persecution he's going to bring, they are going to be victorious. Why? Because their hope is not in themselves, it is in the true and living God, who even death itself has no answer for. That death has been turned back. He says, this is why rejoice you in heaven, because you have overcome them. You have overcome the accuser of the brethren by the blood of the Lamb, by his sacrifice, by the proclamation, by accepting of the gift, and you are in Christ. That's where the victory lies. And they can rejoice. To the people on the earth, well, it's going to be rough for a while. Woe to you who are on the earth. And it's going to talk about, when it comes to it, and so we're going to get into it in the next chapter, that he's going after everybody to make war against all the saints. And then the very next encouragement that it gives, because it says he's going to make war against the saints, and from the world's perspective, he's going to conquer them. It's like, well, where's the victory in that for the saints? And the very next thing it says, the saints have victory. How did they do it? Through the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony. The same thing. So no matter what the dragon brings, no matter what Satan brings, he's already defeated. And for the believer, death is not a defeat. In fact, it's their victory. And so we celebrate it. Even though it can be hardship, no matter what they went through. One of the books that was, it's going to sound funny, but in the washroom of our dorm, just one of the other guys put it in there, was Jesus Freaks. It's just a story, 2 volumes of nothing but the stories of martyrs. That's all it is. And I'm pretty sure everybody in there read it. You gotta remember, that's before cell phones were out, so everyone's in the bathroom on their cell phone. Other places there were arch copies. No, it was the story of the martyrs. That's all it was. And you read stories of families that would willingly go through it and say, no, I'll choose Christ. And that's not the end for them. They take the words of what Paul said, for me to die is gain. I'm absent from the body, I'm present with Christ, and that's victory. And he says, and when I stop and I think about this, then what's the proclamation I'm going to make? 1 Corinthians 15. Where, O death, is your sting? Where, O grave, is your victory? So the worst thing that the enemy can do to us at that point is to take our life, and to take our life does nothing except give us victory, because we're in Christ. Well, that doesn't mean during that time it's going to be pleasant. They're saying, whoa, he's coming down because he knows his time is short. And so it's approximately going to be that 3.5 years where it's why we call it typically the Great Tribulation, because that is what is coming.